Hi, I'm Alex. First, thanks a lot for joining my session, and also thanks a lot for the beautiful gummy bear analogy. I now have to find something equally creative to come along with. I want to talk to you about the unfair advantage using digital transformation to leap ahead. And the unfair advantage may have a little bit of a negative connotation, but I want to use it more, not really as using shortcuts or cheating and so on, but in the connotation, for example, that the motorsports quite often is used. And in that case, the unfair advantage means that a team is so peculiarly prepared, taking everything into consideration before they engage in that enterprise, taking into account the setup, the motor tuning, the fitness of the drivers to be perfectly prepared for the result they aspire. And as such, they have, of course, the unfair advantage against those competitors who did not spend this kind of thoughts on this topic. And it's basically what we can achieve with digital transformation, and that, from my perspective, we should achieve with digital transformation. So let's start right in. What basically can you achieve when you using digitally transformation the right way? And it's about many things that you were not able to do before. Generally spoken, customer centricity, for example, is one of the aspects that is quite often told. And customer centricity in that aspect means, like, for example, that you are able to build up new business model based on customer-centric processes, and as such are able to transform and disrupt probably the industry that you are in, because you have that unfair advantage. And yeah, the examples in that area, they're quite well known, often publicized. Like, you can take a Spotify, where the customer centricity moves the whole business from like selling the physical carrier of the product, which is music, to the access to music, because basically this is all that the most usual listeners is interested in. Or for example, Tesla, the same thing, pulling away that usual or the original purpose of like selling physical cars or the medium of transportation to transportation services. Agility resilience is more or less the, I would call it the backside of it, because there it's not about like disrupting industries, but reacting the best possible ways to disruptions. And disruptions, of course, cannot just come from other market participants, so that you have to react on their inventions and ideas. But of course, you may be forced, and I think we've seen a lot of examples in the last years, to outside-in disruptions, be it a pandemic, being like a ship going rogue in the Suez Channel. Sven Deniken used a very beautiful example by saying, like, the change from a demand-driven supply chain to a constraint-driven supply chain. We have to react to that, and we find out basically any day when we interact with our customers how tough it can be to win these kind of capabilities that enable you to perfectly react to it. And when you talk, for example, to now in retro perspective, like 2 years after, how companies coped or went on with the supply chain shock, for example, of Corona, you find out that those customers who were able to do certain things came off better. Like, for example, a customer of mine who said, like, I was already on S/4HANA, I had everything, the complete data in one data model. So basically what I was able to do then was, I was able to do every end of the week a soft close. So using something of this kind of, let's say, new reporting methods to know exactly where I was. So that enabled me to react in the best possible way. Efficiency and effectiveness, also something which comes out of it, because when you optimize in the way of digital transformation, we will talk about in a few minutes, most of the cases you will find that efficiency has a high prominent point in the way you optimize yourself, which means like you try to improve the things you basically did all the time. But digital transformation should, of course, also about being able to do things you were not able to do before. Those things, for example, we learned in customer centricity and agility resilience in the topic. Sustainability, we've heard already today a beautiful speech about this by Ben, but I would like to retrain it a little bit and to say very easy about this. This is about keeping your possibility of long-term profitability, yeah? Because you're able now to cope with by basically knowing now numbers or being able to steer your company with numbers you were not able to do before. And of course, collaboration, because we learned, I think, that this is a far better way to do business and to survive especially when you're dealing with vendors and customers not based on point-to-point connections, but in networks. But since those kind of things most of the times happening, or these initiatives start with actually buying an application, does this mean that digitalization is an off-on switch? So I buy licenses or a subscription for a cloud product, and now I'm digitally transformed and everything is now different. Unfortunately not. From my perspective, products and applications are always the start and the ending point of a journey, but all the thing in between has still done by people, by you and by us. So when you look, for example, at the results, you find that basically you can end up anywhere after digitalization initiative based on the input you gave into that initiative. You have, of course, these kind of examples where we named like companies who were able to disrupt their industries, who were in the kind of value creation level, of course, ended up quite high. But of course, we also have to say that there are plenty of companies who did just what was necessary during that implementation. They, most of the times, did something of a lean migration where they carried over their legacy processes and basically continued the way to do before. Was there a big revolutionary value for them? Not really. And this is exactly where that kind of trapped value gap then starts to exist, and where this kind of unfair advantage can be achieved between those who basically did their homework right and tried to fully leverage the benefits of digital transformation, and those who let it a little bit more loose and did not put the effort in it. But of course, the one are the future disruptors, and the other one, the one who have this to react. So let's take a look about the ones who are more on the lower side. What are the characteristics of them? And some experts, when they look at how these kinds of, let's say, digital transformation initiatives for some of the more lower performers have come out, they use or started, for example, to use the word a zombie ERP. What is a zombie ERP? A zombie ERP is something, yes, which is definitely dead, but artificially kept alive. It's characterized by, most of the times, legacy processes who are like 15 to 20 years old, have been migrated to, again, new technical platforms for third or fourth times, and eating up the ability to innovate. Because in reality, if you look into it, you realize that they have an ERP where basically everybody who has to work with it tries to avoid it and tries to work around these kinds of processes that absolutely do not in any way show the reality or the strategy or the situation in which these kinds of players are in. So what is the reason? Why do you end in those zombie ERP situations? And what are the stumbling stones in that? And basically, from my perspective, there are three reasons or three traps you should avoid in that aspect. The first one is the cost phantom, or I call it sometimes the grandma's couch syndrome. And what is the grandma's couch syndrome? My grandma, for example, she used to have a couch until the end of her life that she bought, I think, in the beginning of the 70s. And of course, in the end of the lifetime, this couch was neither beautiful to look at, nor it was very comfortable to sit on it. To be honest, it was quite a mess. You hurt your back, you felt all the springs. But why did she never get rid of that old stuff? Because she said, yeah, it used to be so expensive back then when I bought it. And interestingly, when you talk with some customers, you quite often hear the same argument why they want to carry over their old legacy processes, which do not really resemble anything what they seen as a situation and a strategy, again, to a new technology. Because they said, like, we had so many investments to build up the old ECC like 15 years ago. We have to save these kinds of investments. So that's our motivation to do something of a lean migration. But it would be the better thing probably to say, like, look, times have changed. We should get rid of that. Other point is the process blindness. Whenever you ask companies why they work the way they do with, for example, processes they are 20 years old, they will tell you, yeah, because industry specifics or because that's the way things or games have run. And most of the times these perceptions are not really true or are misleading, because whenever you look into a legacy process and the way you work there, the only reason the legacy process exists that way is because at that time, when you defined it, it was the only way to make or to operationalize the strategy you had back then with the technology which was available back then. But times have changed. So you should now start to look forward and stop basically asking yourself how processes have been run in the past, but look forward, ask yourself about the strategy that you have, ask about what kind of demands customers have from you, and then basically, like an ice hockey player, try to go not where the puck is, but the puck where it's going to be. And of course, IT focus. One of the biggest mistakes you could do is basically see digital transformation as an IT project or as an IT initiative. This is quite often something what happens because management puts down the initiative, say, oh, that's IT stuff. IT, please do this. But how shall business benefits come out of something where business doesn't want to be involved in? And you see this, for example, when you look at this chart, which shows you a little bit how the tone of your discussion and where you settle up your initiative, how it influences basically your outcome. For example, when you look on the left side, when you see it as an IT initiative, this means also that your discussion is very technical. So the spends you have are costs. So you probably need a cost case. And you will always be more talk about carrying over existing processes and trying to use benefits in that area which are based on technical things only. And obviously you also probably will do something of a brownfield, which is a migration of your existing processes. But the more you try to bring the business into it, the more you try to make this kind of a business initiative, you will realize that the whole discussion then becomes strategic. You're looking not to the back, but you're looking to forward. And the spends in that case also are going away from that cost case trap into you treat it as investment. And spends in that case are completely different talked about than in other cases. Also, of course, you move away from doing migrations only to maybe a greenfield would be the right thing for you, but nothing has to be black and white in these cases. You can also use selective data transition in that area to optimize yourself. So the learning out of that is that basically three very easy questions have to be asked. And this is so easy that sometimes it's overlooked because most of the digital transformation initiatives always start with the what, asking the what. Basically, what does the application offer to me? What is the benefit that is there when I, for example, implement a cloud solution like that? But this has no connection with yourself and with your situation, with your strategy. You should always start basically a step earlier, asking the why, asking for the purpose. Why should I do this? And what is basically what my customers are expecting from myself? And especially, what are the things I have to be able to do in the next 5 to 10 years to remain successful in my business? Then you can answer this question with the what, and the how then, of course. The approach question is then how I get the horsepower to the street in the best way. So that's why, for example, we always try to do what we call a best practice approach, consisting of 5 or 6 steps. When we go to the customer and in the first step, of course, the right mind setting. We discuss about the customer context. What is the SAP strategy? What are the best practices of best-in-class SAP adopters in that area, for example? Because this is something which gets a little bit overlooked when we use demos in our ecosystem, or when we have something like visiting other customers. We always look just as the result, but we seldom look at basically the journey the customer did to achieve these results. And these kinds of journey discussions are quite often even more interesting and enlightening than if you just look isolated at the results, where you then basically cannot really put a connection to your situation. Second step, definitely build a process map and separate commodity processes and differentiating processes. This is very important, and we've heard these kind of, let's say, wordings already several times today. The commodity processes are basically those processes where everybody across all industries can agree on a certain best practice or a certain standard. So these processes are HR, for example, finance in many cases, travel, and so on. So basically those processes you in the end do not really want to care for. Yeah, you want to put them into the cloud, consume it, the standard out of it, and done. The differentiating processes are those processes, though, where your customer in the end decides, does he buy from you or does he buy from your competition? And that's basically where you really want to put the horsepower to the street concerning effectiveness, what we've seen in the first slide. So that means that you treat these kind of processes completely different. You want to optimize on the bottom line, in the commodity processes, and you want to optimize in the top line concerning the differentiating processes. Then you start in the first step, of course, the strategic goals discussion. You want to discuss about the challenges, about the capabilities the customer needs to fulfill his goals. These are, of course, in many cases industry specific, and in step 4, we derive the needed capabilities, and then in step 5, show, based on the architecture that we discussed with the customer, what kind of applications can offer features and functionalities that enable the customer to do the capabilities to reach his goals. Another thing why this is quite important is because this kind of practice can help you, if you do this before the start of an implementation, to answer a question which is quite often a misunderstanding, because I get quite often greeted by customer with the word, hello, my name is XYZ, we are going to be a brownfield customer. And I'm always surprised that he already knows that at that early stage that he just wants to do a migration, and when you ask them, the only reason you quite often hear is, yeah, because we do not want to invest too much in the processes, or we want to save our investments, so basically our 3 traps. When you do this kind of practice and you basically extract the capabilities you need, and you put these capabilities on a time scale, like short-term, mid-term, long-term, so the things basically when you will be able to, or when you need to be able to do this, you quite quickly realize what you really are. Because if you would have most of those needed capabilities in the short-term section, then it obviously means that you have the urge of change in your IT and in your basically landscape. So this is not something which really a migration customer looks like. Those customers who have the most things to do on the short term are those you basically in the end see as a more greenfield customer. But if you have the most of the challenges on your timescale more in the long-term area, then probably you are well advised to make these kinds of migration in the beginning, and then after the go-live, go into optimization phase. So like in many cases, there is no really black and white. There's a lot of gray area into it, which means that, yeah, those things should be discussed quite thoroughly in the beginning. And to give you an impression, especially when you talk about efficiency and effectiveness and differentiating process and commodity process, you see here that this gives you then the guidance when you have identified your commodity processes and your differentiating processes, how you should basically optimize which kind of processes. Yeah? When you look for automation, for example, this is something for the commodity processes, because those are the ones you want just to have run through without any exceptions. Process automatization within the differentiating processes is something you have to be careful with, because quite often this is where you want to have more of speed up signal to action, insight to action possibilities, where you probably have a little bit more input into it, but this is the area where you basically are able in the end to generate your new business models. Last thing, of course, in that area, sustainability, because we always talk about sustainability, but as we already heard today in the morning from Vestas, this is something which actually needs a lot of input on the IT side. You cannot switch from a linear economy to a circular economy, which means like getting rid of that take, make, use, and dispose process to a circular collect, remake, and reuse circle without the usage of severe IT technology, which gives you the possibility really to do this kinds of tracking, carbon footprint analysis, and so on. Lately, first I've read an analysis concerning Swiss customers where the analysis said like basically all of Swiss companies have to be able to report certain numbers in the year of 2023, but 80% at the moment are not even aware how to extract this kind of number out of their systems. And I think this is quite a good picture to show us that there's definitely a long way to go, but like always, the biggest or the most important part and aspect is to get into conversations with that, ideally with us, and we are looking forward to help you to gain this kind of unfair advantage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexander. As I am a huge fan of best practices, maybe there are some you can share with us considering the approach when moving to the cloud.
The cloud has some specific best practices. You can use, of course, most of that what we've talked about also in the cloud. The cloud maybe has this special aspect that, of course, there you need, of course, a very disciplined mindset in the beginning, that you do not go into that and make something like a huge book of probably requirements that you're going to have, but you really make a fit to standard. You look basically what does the standard offer to you. You have to justify why, or in cases you are not able to use the standard, not the vice versa like it used to be in the past, and then really try to squeeze that kind of differentiating part where you individualize to as small as possible area.
And in your opinion, are these approaches industry neutral, or are there differences?
They are neutral. What you, of course, may experience that you have a change in what is a commodity process and what is a differentiating process, because there are certain industry who consider certain things as differentiating, which other industry would consider as differentiating. But in the end, basically, the principle is the same.
Okay, perfect. Then, Alexander, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, too.